My name is Ray Berg. I have a co-presenter with me tonight who will introduce themselves in a second.
Hi, I'm Eve, they, them. Nice to meet you.
Hey, and we are going to talk to you a little bit about an experiment we just ran, which I think was pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll do intros for myself. I am a board member now. I'm the most senior board member. I just joined a couple weeks ago, but I have been on the board for about 5 years before. Used to run the mentorship program. I ran 5 of those semesters, and I could talk a little bit about that if people have questions about it, the way it used to run. And that turned into the Buddy Mentorship Program later on. I'm a software developer working mostly in Python at a company called Spot On over that way. And I like working on Python stuff.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Eve. I'm a graphic designer, and I'll give more of an in-depth introduction a little bit later on, but I've been graphic design for about 5 years, and I'm thinking of switching careers. So here I am.
Yeah, so that gets to the idea for the talk. So we were kind of spitballing a few ideas for what kind of talks we would want to see in the future. And one talk I wanted to see was a talk where somebody went through and tried to learn Python or learn more about Python within 2 weeks, and to do sort of focused study. The mentorship program used to run over 13 weeks of individual meetings. And so that's a long period of time to pick up skills, and people would really develop over that time. And to be honest, I don't have much experience trying to work on skills development in a really tight period. And that's the kind of experience that you typically see in schools, boot camps, where you're really working one-on-one with somebody over a short period of time. And so I put this call out. You can see the timestamps. It went from idea at 12:03 p.m. to call for action 12:09. That's usually about how it goes around here. And then at 12:05, before I even posted the other one, Jemile, who's the chair, said, I know somebody. I know a person named Eve who's fantastic, and I'll reach out to them and we'll see what we can do. And so Eve reached out 5 p.m. So by the talk time started at 12:03. By 5:01, 5 or 6 hours later, I don't know about that, but we were able to figure out that maybe this would work out. And we had figured out that there was a few times where we could do this. We nailed it down. We said, let's try to do 10 days over February 6th to February 17th. And so we laid out the days that we would meet. And we said, okay, well, let's go from there. So what we needed first to get this started, the whole point of this talk is to kind of walk you through how we approached the problem and how we approached working together. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is our session 0. Session 0 is commonly used in the Dungeons and Dragons community and talk about getting together and planning how you're going to play together. There's a resource on the bottom you could take a look at, but common guides are that you cover topics like this. Session 0 is really helpful, I think, for us, because we needed to do the same things you would do when you tell a story together, right? You needed to do some team building. We needed to talk about when the hardest part of playing Dungeons and Dragons, especially as an adult, is knowing when you can meet your friends to do a thing for 3 hours. So when, where, how were we going to do this? How much of it was going to be async? What were the table expectations? What were the self-study requirements? What were the check-ins going to be like? And so we talked through our backgrounds and what we were interested in doing, and we talked about what we thought would work. Then we tried to apply a framework or structure to that, which I'll talk about on the next slide, and set some house rules for like, when are you allowed to walk away and say like, this isn't working, which was, we decided anytime. So the fact that we're giving a talk is pretty good. Yeah, so we did the session 0. We did a kickoff. This is us meeting. We tried to take a few pictures just to keep it interesting. We met exclusively on Google Meet. This is the first time we were meeting in person. The power is sort of like a pandemic style mentorship. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which worked out pretty well, I think. So the meetings, we did our session. We planned out how that was going to work. And then we said, okay, here's the plan. Let's meet 10 times in 10 days. We're going to collaboratively define what that style is going to look like, what that structure is. But we're going to really intentionally use 1 hour a day to specifically focus on what's been happening and where this is going. And the goal was to make sure that we were checking in to make sure that the things that we had said we were going to try to do were being met, and the things that we wanted to do were going to come out forward. And we wanted to keep an eye on how much time it was going to take. It never worked out, but the structure that for our meeting was on the top right. So the first thing we'd start with, fun fact or joke, I don't think either of us told jokes.
Yeah, we're mainly fun facts.
Yeah.
We're not really.
We had some fun facts. And it was a nice way to break the ice, get started. We do a 5-minute check-in, see how the day had gone before for Eve. Then do a 15-minute consult, which would be 15 minutes dedicated just to answering a question or solving a problem that Eve was stuck on. And then focus 25 minutes on concepts and conversation, which is just trying to say, oh, I have this idea, or I want to get to this next area. Dictionaries. Let's talk about how dictionaries work. Let's talk about how they're structured, when they're used, when they're not. So we do a longer discussion in that period. And then we take the last 15 minutes and do goal setting. And the goal was to do this every day for 10 days, 2 weeks straight. In addition to whatever other obligations we had in life, that was the plan. And we did really good sticking to the schedule, except for the days that are not pink. The days that are not pink. The red one was really bad, but we would go over when we were excited or interested. I think the first one, you'll hear about it, was the end of the first week, the end of a project. The 15th was just like a topic that really we wanted to talk about. So we went to think about maybe a half hour long, 15 minutes long on the 16th. And then on the 17th, I had to go to the DMV. So we did like a 2-hour session while I was driving from the west suburbs. And
What else are you gonna do while you're driving?
Yeah.
Back.
I remember I stopped at Culver's to get a burger and I said, I'll call you as soon as I'm done. And then I got on the road and sat behind a train and a whole bunch of other things. But we went long, but it was a pretty good end of the 2 weeks. So with that, I'm going to turn it over because after we sort of set this up, the structure, Eve did all the hard work. And I'd like to hear from you.
Hi, I'm Eve. And as I've said, I'm a graphic designer and I worked at MMI and Zach's Professional Services. So combined about 5 years. And I was feeling really burnt out by having to be creative, but also having lots of creative hobbies that I wanted to do outside of work. So I kind of wanted to step away from doing creative as my full-time job. And also with the pandemic and working from home, it was just like getting a little bit too much. So I thought about switching fields, maybe something to do like front-end development that's still kind of graphic design, like adjacent. I can still use my skills to like supplement my career change. So I started learning Python for a few months because it's a good, first coding language to learn. And also I heard it was good in interviews. So, might as well pick up the skill. So I was doing like self-studying for a few months, doing Udacity courses and then doing HackerRank, but I was feeling kind of lost. I didn't really know what the next step is because I was just doing practice problem that wasn't really like kind of getting me anywhere. So when Jamili reached out about this mentorship opportunity, I was like super excited. I really wanted someone who was in the industry to help kind of give me some guidance on what to do next and kind of topics to learn about. And so day one, we talked about my background. So like what I did in school. I did learn some HTML and CSS in school, some web stuff. And I took some JavaScript classes on Code Academy during my first job, just in my own time. And I made some like practice sites for that. And coming in, I really didn't have any expectations just because I was so new. I really didn't know what was out there. So I just kind of was really eager to learn. And we did a skill assessment just to kind of get an idea for a rate of how much I know and have learned so far by myself. And what my current coding setup was and how that can be made better and more efficient. And so the structure of my day-to-day is doing some practice problem like coding bats and HackerRank to start the day. And depending on what I was doing, I would like watch some tutorials on YouTube or do some readings. And then I would journal and record what I did each day and how long I spent each day studying. And for week one, we have the iPod project that I was gonna do. And then for week two, I was going to host my currently existing portfolio site on Python Anywhere with Python and Flask. And so I want to talk about a little bit of the practice with just kind of as a beginner of how like I'm like learning and applying the stuff that I learned in practice problems. So I have been really looking for a site that had more more like easy and focus on specific concept for drilling. Because like I would take the Udacity course and they would have a couple of problems after each lesson. So that was helpful. But like when I went straight to doing HackerRank, it was really difficult because they wanted you to put a bunch of concepts together, and I hadn't really done that in any of the classes. So kind of trying to think about the stuff that I learned and trying to put them together was difficult. So I really appreciated this side for just kind of drilling specific, simple concept so that it really sticks with you. And also, since they were kind of more easy problems, it was really good, kind of like a first win in the day to kind of start out and motivate me to continue to do harder things later on. And so as I talked about HackerRank, it's very long and very difficult for me and takes a really long time just because I'm like switching over from design, like the type of thinking that I needed to do was completely different. So it was very hard in the beginning for me to switch gears to thinking more like logically, like variables, like not just plugging in the numbers like you do in math class. And I kind of knew the logic of things, kind of know the pseudocode, but not really how to actually like write the code itself. That was hard when I started out, and I really wish there was like a hint system. So like when you got stuck, you're not just kind of like either have to look at the discussion straight up to see what the answer was, or on like Stack Overflow, which I feel like wasn't as helpful because I wanted to learn how to solve the problem, not just look at the answer. So I think a hint system would have been really helpful. So since I am really new, I kind of want to walk you through how I approach a HackerRank problem as a beginner. So on day 3, the first 2 days, it went really well. I did some reading of the automate the boring stuff with Python. And then I did some coding batch. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do a harder problem today. And little did I know that it took basically the whole day before the meeting to work on this problem. So way longer than I thought. So this problem is about a shoe shop owner, and he has a specific number of pair of shoes in different sizes. So there's a number of customers that he had that day, and each of them wants to purchase a specific shoe size, and they're willing to pay X amount of money. So we want to know how much the shoe shop owner made at the end of the day. So the first thing about HackerRank is that they give you a bunch of inputs, and nowhere in the Udacity courses or anything I learned talked about like, what do you do with these inputs? Like sometimes they're not just, single line thing. They're a bunch of numbers on one line. What do you do with them? Nowhere did they talk about any of that. So I was really confused when I started learning. And so eventually, like I learned about, other concepts. So I was able to split up the second line into a list with to separate the individual integers. And so the first 3 line was really simple, straightforward. But then I was really like, what do I do with the rest of these lines? How do I like put them or store them? So I was like, maybe a dictionary, because you can access the keys and values, and I will be able to try to match them with the numbers in the shoe shop's owners. So at first I was like, okay, maybe I'll do like a update to update each of these 2 numbers into a dictionary, but that didn't really work. And then I tried again, and then realized, I was like, wait, why is it not giving me multiple of the first 3, because they're all size 6? And I was like, oh, dictionaries don't allow duplicates. Didn't work. So then like after a really long time, I was like asked for help from friends who already is in the industry and knows code. I was like, why isn't this working? They were just like, okay, why do you need to store these variables permanently? And I'm like, wait, you can just not store them permanently? Like, I also a concept that I didn't learn, which again, I wouldn't have thought of. So then I just left it in the for loop instead of trying to push all these separate lines into their own stored variable. And then I moved on to the rest of the code, and then it still wasn't working. Oh no, why is it not working? Struggles. So then after me and my person I asked for help, like we're just staring at the screen, like, why isn't it working? Logically, it should work, right? Like, and then I realized that these three weren't integers. They were split, which made them into a list of strings. So then I was just like, it's always the really simple stuff that you forget about. Like logically it makes sense, right? Because you're looking at numbers, but the computer sees them as strings because that's how the code works. So after 4 long hours of headache, finally got to the answer. Woo. So then, in the third line, you can see the shoe size. I also had to map them into integers. Just a bunch of things had to be converted into integers. And so some of the takeaways that it took a really long time, even longer than I thought it was going to be. And a lot of that time was kind of wasted on manually entering the inputs, just because like I didn't know, I hadn't learned about like setting up like a test thing where it just kind of did that for you. So I was literally like, every time I ran my program, I was just like entering like 10, 2, blah, blah, like doing that every time. So it took forever. And apparently you don't always need to permanently store variables. Like who would have thought? So, and I was during the meeting with Ray, I was like, I literally went through the 5 stages of grief working on this problem. Like it was so difficult. And at the end, my answer to when I finished, I like had less lines of code than when I started. So I kind of feel like, oh, I spent all this time and I didn't even write that many lines of code. Kind of feel like I feel like I wasted the time, like I should have ended up with more code. So during the meeting, we talked about like splitting up codes into smaller parts. So decoupling, so that, when you go back and we want to update something, we want to debug or fix something, that it's easier to figure out where the problem is. How to solve problem using classes and function, which I hadn't learned that much about in my Udacity courses, and how to set up the darn test info. So I didn't have to enter it every single time. That would save me a lot of time. And so the project this week was the iPod project, what I spent mostly doing on day 4 and day 5. So the idea was that I had a really old iPod that I wanted to get my music off of. And then when I did, it renamed all my files into random 4-letter file names. So I was like, okay, do I really want to manually go in and retype all the song names and the artists? That sounds like I have over like 1,500 songs. Like, really don't want to do that. I've been like left this thing for over, I think about 10 years now. I was like, I haven't done that manually. Just seems like it'll take a lot of time. But then I was like, one of the Udacity course classes I was taking was like about scripting and like opening, reading, writing files. So I was like, oh, hey, maybe I can do something like that where it just takes the data from the song files and then replace the file name with those instead of me doing it manually. So here's the folder structure. As you can see, they're just like F1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but in each of these is a random number of songs. And but if you go into the properties, you can see that it still has the title and the artist name. So I found this third-party library that's called ID3 that you can grab those info from the files to replace. So I ran it in a test folder and everything seems fine until I got to the bottom where I was like, oh, one of the songs didn't work. Why didn't it work? I checked the property, it was 0 bytes. So I was like, that's kind of weird. Like I have another song, the very last song that has Korean in it, and that one worked. So like, why didn't this other one work that has English characters? So then at the meeting, we were like kind of staring at it. And then we was like, oh, does it have any like special characters? And we're just like, oh yeah, it has a colon, which was a reserved character. So that made the program like stop. And the next day on day 5, after I did some more editing on my code, Ray was like, okay, you gotta do it on your real folder now. And I was like, sweat, like maybe I should do copy instead of like move. So in case something goes wrong, I'll still have my files. And then so I went into the folder, I like kind of didn't realize there were other file types other than MP3. So I had to add a little bit of code in to skip those ones. And we found out there was a lot more reserved characters that I had to replace. And actually some of those songs that didn't have the title or the artist. So again, like something I didn't think of. So we had to add like some more code to do with that. And the reflection was that, code doesn't run perfectly the first time you run it. So like there was a lot of things that I didn't consider when I started, like, but it was a really good feeling when I like did get it to work and I saw it kind of like doing its thing. I was like, whoa, this is so cool. Like I wrote a thing that did that. And then it wasn't just like another practice problem that like you finish it, like nothing happened, right? Like I did something that like fixed a thing that I was waiting on for like 10 years not to do because it was going to take forever. And during the meeting, we kind of figured out, like all these issues that we ran into that I hadn't thought of, and to fix those like errors and exceptions and how to get it to work. And so for the next week, day 6 to 9 was really focused on the portfolio project. I have my own current like graphic design portfolio site hosted, but we wanted to move that to the Python Anywhere and using Flask to replace my PHP contact file, which is just from a template, with Python and Flask. And we also wanted to learn a little bit more about Git and GitHub, about static dynamic pages, and how to integrate the email API that Ray has made with my contact form. So I started out this project by watching some tutorial videos about a Flask and making practice pages and doing like the templates and setting up Python Anywhere and downloading my portfolio site. And then the next step was to set up my portfolio site locally in the Flask folder directory structure and relink all the files in my portfolio site. So like all the images, all the JavaScript, all the CSS files and fonts and etc. And some of the links actually broke when I did that. So we had to figure out like why they broke, and also to set up the project on GitHub for this one. And the next step was to update the contact form. So I did like a kind of a test page. And for any of you who watches Avatar: The Last Airbender, get the reference. So I had just like the 4 form field that I had exactly matched my current portfolio. So when I did the test, the way I knew it would work, because it's not hooked up to anything, is that when I hit submit, it will kind of reload the page with the info that I've entered. So that's when I know like, hey, it was working. So the next step after that was to link the code that I wrote in Flask to my actual portfolio, which was a lot easier than I thought it was, because I thought you had to like hook up all these things, but I literally just had to change the URL to the contact form. That was it, super simple. So the next step was to get it to integrate with BBmail, which was the email API that Ray had made. And I learned about like .env files and secret key and never to upload them on GitHub. And tried not to get it to work just like locally, which we did, but also working on Python Anywhere. So some of the problems that we encountered was that at first in the template, I couldn't get like the form to work. It was having like different issues with like the amount of variables I had, but then there was like too many or like not enough. And then we were getting some errors. We were trying to integrate the email API. And then we found out that Python Anywhere had a allow list, and anything that wasn't on that list, we had to email them about and ask them to add it. So once we did that, we were just like still getting errors. Like it should be working now. We did so much troubleshooting. And then Ray eventually found out there was like a configuration on Python Anywhere that we needed to add our .env file to, because every time it spins up, it's going into this configuration to look at what it needs to start up. And since our file wasn't in there, it was not finding it. So that was like the last error that we fixed like a month later afterwards. We're just like, yes, it's finally working. And, while we were kind of doing all the troubleshooting with this portfolio thing, like the Chrome inspection was also doing wonky things where it was like 3D bending on my portfolio site. Very strange. And some of the takeaways that was like very exciting to do an actual project. Like the ipod project was like something that I already had done, and I got there to work with code. So that was really exciting. I felt like, I did something. And, after all the troubleshooting was like, oh, getting it to work was like a great feeling. And I also learned how to read up and look at error messages. And during the meeting, we learned about the programming ecosystem and how the different parts work together, and lots about GitHub, adding, pushing, and making commits, and the integration with BBML and troubleshooting.
I forget what we decided on who goes first.
You were starting.
I'm gonna go first.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, this is the weird thing is usually when you see these presentations, we've done them at ChiPy, and it covers 13 weeks. So this happened in 10 days, which I think is really fascinating, right? We start off with like dictionaries and lists and that sort of stuff we were really drilling on the first couple of days, and then getting all the way up to like understanding why is there a WSGI file and why, .env configurations. And some of the stuff, number one, I really wish that Heroku was still around, because they really spoiled us for like maintaining our configurations. Free Heroku, by the way. I'm looking out there at Heroku. So yeah, but Python Anywhere is great. It's fantastic. It's just not quite there for configuration management. But one of the things that I learned in this, and I think it's a thing that I'm thinking is, even I think worked really well together. And Jemile was really the person who like connected and said like, oh, you two are going to pair off really well. That was a thing we did in the mentorship program. That was like, I can see the things that are strong in this person and the things that are strong in this person, and I can see how they're going to complement each other. And I thought that worked really well for us. Much more important than any place that you're starting is the motivation, and I think I saw that a lot with Eve. I would shout out now. Eve is a fantastic learner and very interested and engaged. Like as soon as I'd give like a piece of information, and then I'd come back the next day, and there'd be like start planting a seed. The next day there would be half of a tree there. Like, whoa, okay, cool, that's really awesome. So it was really neat to see that. There's more than one way to practice. This really did change the way I kind of viewed short-term learning, which is kind of cool. But one of the things they said on our last day was that the journal had helped with losing steam, and I think you'll talk a bit more about this, but it was something I'm like, I should do this more for myself. And so I got something out of that as well. I'll turn it back over to you.
So speaking on the journal part, like there were days where I just like was like doing work, but I'm just like, oh, I feel like I didn't like do anything that day. But it was like good to look back at the journal I was keeping. So I was like, oh no, I did, do this, and that. Like, cause sometimes even just during like regular when I was working, sometimes you just feel like, oh, I didn't finish a thing. So it felt like I didn't do anything that day just because I didn't finish like a project or like a task. So just be able to go back and look at the journal and be like, oh yeah, I did do like X, Y, and Z today. I didn't just, do nothing. It was really helpful to kind of keep me motivated. It's like, oh yeah, I like did do a bunch of things. Like I could still like keep learning and add to, the things that I've accomplished. And I've definitely put in more time and when I do the 2 weeks and self-study, because like, I feel like when I'm the type of person where there's like no deadline, it just becomes like, oh, I could learn this. I try to do it. I push myself, but it's like really hard to keep that going consistently over like a long period of time. So like having the meeting every single day, I just like, okay, I need to learn and do X amount of hours before the meeting really like push me harder to like do more. And I learned that, doing something like easy or simple and having that first like win of the day really helps motivate me to keep going. Because sometimes you immediately dive into the really hard stuff. It's like difficult and you don't get it like the first few times. So it just kind of really like demoralizes you. So having that first little thing in the beginning of the day is just really helpful, I find. So, and also learn that, lines of code does not equal to how skilled you are or how knowledgeable you are, because sometimes like you have simple answers that doesn't take multiple lines of code to fix or like do the problem. And then the more I know something, the more I feel like I didn't know. So at first I was like, when I started out, like I was like, oh, I think I kind of know some of this stuff. But then at the end, I was like, oh, I feel like, and when I started, I didn't really know that much. Now that I've learned more, because now I know there's a lot more out there. And again, I mentioned before, was like, it was so draining. At the end of the day, after I meet it, I was like, oh my God, I just want to turn my brain off and like just doom scroll on Instagram or Reddit and not have to think anymore, because like, again, switching from like design work, it was like a complete different type of like mentally drain that I had. And some of the things that like didn't work that well was that like we didn't have that much like clear goal setting at the end. We end up talking a lot about like the topics and stuff, but then didn't really set aside time specifically for like the goal setting, and didn't have as much as instructions as I would have liked to, like what to do next and how to get that started, especially with the portfolio project with like something completely new like Flask. I like wasn't really sure like what to do next, and learning how to like about posts and get and forms and stuff. That was really confusing. So I kind of felt lost. And the beginning of some of the days, I kind of spent a lot of time just kind of figuring out what I was supposed to do rather than kind of just diving in, which lost some bit of time.
Yeah, and that's the biggest takeaway from me when we were talking through this at the end. It harkened back to a lot of the conversations that we have in as a full-time developer. You just have these conversations where you're talking to a team, you're like, oh, how are you doing? How are you making progress? And junior devs, especially when you're like trying to do something quick, they're the ones that suffer. They don't have the direction or the like, they don't know all the gaps that you left in that conversation. So we might have a conversation that's like, great, we're gonna do this, this, and this. Does that sound good? They're like, yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah, and then when I go to do it the next day, I'm like, wait, I actually needed more information about like all of that, like because I didn't know. So once I had a chance to like actually look at it, then the details, then it's like, oh wait, I actually needed more like information.
And so that's when you keep those tight timelines. So doing this 2-week sprint, I really feel like it pushes the pressure on the learner a lot more than it does otherwise. And again, we as seniors need to make sure that we're watching to go, how long did you take with this thing? And how can I change that? And we didn't do enough of that check-in, I think, during the process to really like get that feedback cycle. And that's something I could have done better there. Keeping a schedule. As I said in the beginning, one of our goals was to like keep to the timeline. We never had enough time. Never had enough time for goal setting at the end. And 15 minutes, right? We dedicated 15 minutes to it.
We just ended up talking about the stuff that I had issues or like working with stuff, troubleshooting stuff that just kind of like I forgot about it.
And you think that goal setting, I think when you think about it, like think about how much time should we take at the end of a meeting to say, what should we do next? How much time do you take? Like it's usually like a minute, right? Like in a meeting, you usually take like a minute, maybe 2 minutes. And like we're supposed to take 15 minutes and we still didn't hit it, right? And so that's a big lesson that came away for me. The other one is like ramp up, ramp down. This is a fun experiment. It was really cool that you did it with me. But I think the thing that we missed is normal distribution. We missed some of the perks of having like a smooth ramp up and ramp down. We did 1 meeting up front and we did 10 meetings back to back. Yeah. And then we did 2 more meetings after Python Anywhere enabled my my URL scheme, right? Yeah. So it was really not that much. Like if I was going to do it again, I think you'd want to get something more like this, where you're coming up and you're coming down and you're trying to meet the need when you need it. So you actually maybe even meet twice a day, that Friday, Monday, or something like that, or maybe meet in the morning on Monday or something like that, where you're doing more meetings in the middle and less in the end. I think would make more sense for a short-term thing like this. But we did pick up some fun facts about each other. You can see some of the ones that we shared in the week as well. I don't think any of these are worth recapping.
Interested, like
we do keep warriors on our desk. That was pretty fun. I want to come back to the skills assessment. So again, this was as we were kind of we did this together. We thought about what would we like to see. One of the things I was like, oh, it'd be cool to do a skills assessment. Make sure we do that. I always, when I do a project, like a home improvement project, I always forget to take before pictures. Like never do it, ever. I never do it. And skills assessments are great for that, right? They help figure out where you are. So we did a skills assessment on day 0, and that was cool. So this is kind of the same representation on a 5-point scale. So this is Eve's perspective on the first day, or in our pre-session, right? So we also did a 10 minus 10. So this was the assessment at the end of the period about the skills at the first. And so I think this is I don't know if it's Dunning-Kruger, I always use that wrong, but the idea that when you don't know that much about something, am I getting it right for those folks that know these terms? Great, thank you. You can never remember the nouns. So you see that at the 10th day, looking back on what my skills were, right? What was gray was what was thought of initially. And except for, I think, testing. Yeah, testing's the same, but everything else shifts by at least a half a point. And some of them shifted quite largely. Debugging, and I think that might be common for a lot of people. It's like, my debugging skills are great when you're starting out because you're debugging the things that you're writing. And we went like super fast through stuff. Yeah. So at the end, you're debugging like Flask deployments on a deployed service.
Yeah.
And you're
it's mainly Ray doing it on his end. I'm just like, no idea what you're doing right now.
Well, we would walk through and I'd say, okay, click this button. Now click restart the thing. Now do this. And we talk through like, how do you debug that? How do you put log lines out? Where do you look for logs? And then I think that keyed back, how do you use a debugger on the command line? How do you use tools to reflect? And so I think you see some of that shift. So where do we wind up is I think the most interesting question that everyone wants to know. So this was the skills assessment. Again, imagine me driving in my car.
Oh yeah, we did that.
He was taking notes. I'm driving, eating a little bit of a Culver's hamburger, and saying, okay, how do you feel you did on writing? And I did look at my phone occasionally. I'm sorry to all the other drivers that day. But how do you feel you're doing on writing Python code? Like just the day-to-day writing. And we did both of these assessments at the end, the black and the green. And this is where we got to. And so workflow, I was pleased. I think this is the most important thing to get better at, especially when you're a junior. And I remember there's a time I was at ChiPy at a project night. And I told you the story, I think. There's a guy who came up and said, hey, could you help me with my code? I said, sure. I said, oh, could you switch these two things? This would make it a lot easier, faster. It'd be easier to debug if you did these two line changes. And I said, just go ahead and run that. And he like looked at me and he got real tired in his face. It's like, oh, why? No, just run it again with these two lines different. He's like, oh, all right. Can you come back? And I said, why? Just run it. And I'm not saying this is wrong, but this person had been copying and pasting in their code from a big file into the REPL. That's how they were writing Python code for the last year. They'd been working for a year in Python, and they were copying code over every time they were running it. Well, and imagine that, right? Like imagine that, and you got a little taste of that with like typing in manual stuff, right?
I was like in the beginning, I had my VS Code, and then I had a separate terminal that was doing Python test.py, and then I was hitting enter to run my file. So it was like the two separate things. So like Ray got me to use the terminal inside VS Code, and I also had to install WSL because I'm on Windows. Like getting into trouble to set up that whole thing was a nightmare. But like doing that was so much easier than having like the two windows and then like going back and forth.
And that's where I think the workflow improvement, that's one I was the most excited to see, because it doesn't matter how well you can write code today or tomorrow, the next day, as long as you're getting better in the workflow, you're able to iterate faster. That was so cool to see. The other one was, testing. Took a pretty big jump, and deploying was the first deployment, right?
Yeah.
First deployment of production code to internet. But had worked in, applaud for that. That's pretty fantastic. That said, you had been working on it like a PHP sort of a traditional Apache host before. Yeah. So there's something to be said for the fact that you've been able to do that for a long time, and Python Anywhere was tricky, right? Like something to think about. Yeah, this was really cool to see. So yeah, thanks to Gemile for connecting us, for you all for having us here, and for these tools for being together. Anything else? I shout out. I do want to say again, I think this is our last slide. Eve is, like I said earlier, fantastic, a great learner, easy to teach, or to receive information, gobbled things up. I'm really excited. I'm trying to talk to my boss, looking all the time. If I could find a spot for Eve to work for teams, I'm going to do that too. But if she's stolen by somebody else before that, that's fine too. I'll understand that. But really wonderful. It's like great. One of the most satisfying things I think that developers can experience is working with somebody who picks up things really quickly and being excited to work on that stuff. I think you get jaded the longer you're in it. And Eve, you're not jaded. I'm very happy about
Not yet.
Not yet.
Maybe in a few years.
Yeah, let's help get her jaded, I guess. But yeah, thanks to everybody for listening. Some stuff.
Guess I want to this off or
I don't know if there are any questions.
yeah, that was a self-assessment.
I picked. I wound up picking the categories. So I tried to think of the things that we had used as criteria in the mentorship selection, and just general like areas for their interests, right? So web, like data science isn't a factor here, or statistics or modeling or anything like that. So it was a customized assessment just to, and I had some descriptors around each topics. Like writing is just like being able to write basic Python. Essentials would be like lists, dictionaries, comprehensions, classes, like sort of basic stuff that exists within object-oriented programming in Python. Yeah, workflow.
Yeah, the others are pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, Git is one, or version control, I think is one that we overlook a lot. We don't tend to talk about. But any other questions?
Skills assessment for the mentor.
You want to hear mine? Well, I think the things that I pick up are, it's a weird thing to think about, right? Like I definitely picked up a little bit more about, I haven't deployed to Python anywhere in a long time. But the things that I learn are always like shift the perspective of all development, right? Like I think the journaling concept is, I always pick up skills that aren't programming skills as part of the process. So like journaling is going to be a thing that changes the way that I approach all teaching and all like guidance from now on. It was a thing that I think we talked about, like, oh, do you want to journal a little bit?
Yeah, I journal all the time, so.
And it was so successful for you. And it might be just that you are more responsive to it, but I found it, I was really impressed at the end. Eve had really great insights on how those 2 weeks had gone. And that insight on journaling was really useful for me because was huge. I was like, whoa, I didn't expect that at all in our conversation.
Yeah, because I feel like sometimes you're going through things, you know, like even just your day-to-day, like you kind of forget about a lot of things. So like journaling just to help you going back even at like day 10 to like remember like, oh yeah, here's are the things I did each day, to kind of get a sense of like how I progressed, what I worked on, and to remember. So like even just, you know, for non-programming things, like sometimes I just like to write down like what happened, like if there's highlights in my day, what did I do, you know, like who did I talk to, what event did I go to, just kind of gives you like makes you help you remember like, oh, you know, I did do things throughout like the, you know, the day or the month or whatever.
You journal at the end of the day, write it all up for every hour, or
Usually I think I did it at the end of the day. I will like kind of write down what I worked on. So it's like, oh, I did practice problems and I, you know, read some books, I watched tutorial or like about the specific things that I did. So I knew like exactly like looking back, like doing this presentation, we did it like a couple months later after our 2 weeks. So like, again, memory was getting a little fuzzy. So I had the journal to kind of look back on and kind of be like, oh yeah, hey, this is what I did.
Cool. Well, thank you all very much for hearing us and being here.